We get immediately into the meat of the matter. Well, I'm joined by the former President of the Senate and Attorney at Law, Mr. Timothy Hamel-Smith, as we continue our analysis of the ongoing Brent Thomas case here in Trinidad and Tobago. Mr. Hamel-Smith is with us via Zoom. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Ketan. Good morning to all your viewers.
Well,
Great to be here again on WESN.
Well, thank you very much for joining me, sir. Start with this particular phrase, no cabinet involvement. It seems as though there are certain government ministers, inclusive of the Prime Minister, who have distanced themselves of having any knowledge of this alleged illegal abduction of Mr. Brent Thomas from Barbados' jurisdiction to Trinidad and Tobago. Do you think that the citizens of Trinidad and Tobago should take this at face value, that the Prime Minister nor the Minister of National Security were aware of what was taking place?
Well, you notice that the actual phrase is no cabinet. So I take it that means the collective cabinet meeting together did not. It is hard to believe, given the evidence that we have before Justice Rampersad, that somehow persons in Barbados, who now it turns out appears to be part of the RSS, get involved in providing an aircraft for two policemen in Trinidad to fly from Barbados to Trinidad, and that there's been no involvement of government. I mean, that's the difficulty I think that the public has, that it's hard to believe that the government were not involved in some way. And it doesn't mean that, individual government ministers is what may be believed to have permitted this in the absence of any evidence to the contrary. Nobody has been forthcoming, no one has been forthcoming that I'm aware of, who has explained how did the RSS get involved in this matter? How did armed personnel in Barbados, and they don't appear to be personnel that are Trinidad and Tobago personnel, how do they get involved in arresting a Trinidad citizen, taking him from his hotel, and getting him put into a plane, an aircraft, taken to Trinidad? In the absence of explanation, it's hard not to believe.
Well, Mr. Hamel-Smith, the mere fact that the Minister of Energy and Energy Industry, Stuart Young, stood up in Parliament and responded to Opposition Member of Parliament Rudal Monilal that it wasn't a national security aircraft, nor was it a commercial aircraft that was used. It was an RSS aircraft. Does that suggest that there were indeed those who were aware as to what was taking place? Or is it just being prepared to respond to questions in the event they're raised in Parliament?
Yeah. So the RSS is a regional security system based in Barbados, but that does not include Trinidad and Tobago. So it's not as if, this is a body over which Trinidad and Tobago is not part of, has no control over, and yet you are able to initiate what is referred to by the judge as an abduction of Mr. Thomas from Barbados, arrest him, or at least whether you call it arrest, you go into his hotel room with men, a number of men in some sort of black uniform, arrest him. They have guns with them, so you're not going to resist that type of approach. And you are dragged into a vehicle, taken to the airport, and into an aircraft, which we now know are told that it belongs to the RSS. It doesn't matter who it belongs to. There still is the inference that someone was able, and when I say someone, I think the general public believe that someone is a person above the rank of the superintendent who is involved in the matter directly in terms of the interface between the police and Mr. Thomas. He appears to be there. We're told that in order to leave the Trinidad and Tobago, that policeman would have had to have approval from the Minister of National Security. Of course, he could have be on a frolic of his own. That's possible.
But the mere fact that an
RSS
aircraft,
nothing forthcoming.
The mere fact that an RSS aircraft was used, I mean, is there any set standards or set policies and procedures for instances of police operations to be conducted in this particular manner? Are there set guidelines as to how usually these procedures should or do take place?
Yeah, well, if you wanted to have somebody brought back from a foreign country in order to face charges in Trinidad and Tobago, then there is a methodology to go to the court and to get an order allowing you, permitting you to do that. But there is no evidence that that was done. So this appears, without any information to the contrary coming forward, this appears to be just surreptitiously done. And it's hard not to believe that somebody at a governmental level was not involved. In the absence of explanation, we have had no explanation. And therefore, people will draw their own inferences about this. And it's been some time now, and yet no one has come forward, whether it's the police, the minister, and all we know from Dr. Rowley is that the cabinet was not involved. And I don't think that anybody has asserted that the cabinet collectively got together and initiated this. So, one takes him on his word that the cabinet were not involved. That does not mean that an individual minister was not involved or some other government level.
In terms of the Royal Barbados Police Force, we have not heard much coming from the island of Barbados, less for the Attorney General actually suggesting that he was going to request a report from the Commissioner of Police in Barbados, but nothing further since. I would assume, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, I would assume that Trinidad and Tobago Police Service cannot give any instructions to any Bajan police officers and vice versa, and the Commissioner of Police will need to, in order to conduct police operations on Bajan jurisdiction, have to be in contact and give approval to the Commissioner of Police in Barbados.
Yeah, you would make that assumption. Of course, one isn't certain that it was the police who arrested him at his hotel. He says that they were dressed in black. I didn't get the impression that they had a police badge. You don't hear from the evidence that they produced any warrant, they produced any identification. They could have been RSS personnel. It's hard to tell. Until Barbados comes forth and gives us an explanation, then that they too must be, I'm sure their government must be equally embarrassed that this took place on their territory, involving persons who arrest somebody in the middle of the night, take him to the airport. There's so many things. For an aircraft to leave Trinidad and Tobago or to leave Barbados, you have to have the clearance from the tower, from the airport. That's a different level that has to be involved. You don't just land an aircraft in an in another country. Now, it could be the police didn't land the aircraft, they only took off. But you don't take off either without control, the control tower giving you that permission. So there are other elements who are involved in this process. And when when you see the things that precede that, I mean, here you have a matter is going on. This doesn't appear to have been, this is stated in the judgment, but he was under arrest and held in custody. This is Mr. Thomas in Trinidad. A writ of habeas corpus is taken out. They go before Justice Quinlan Williams, and she orders the police to release him, to release Mr. Thomas. One can only conclude that having released him on the order of the court, the police were peeved at the fact that the judge had released Mr. Thomas. And Mr. Thomas then, as I understand from the evidence, proceeded to inform the police through his lawyers, I take it, that I'm going for medical attention in Miami. I am going to be flying and staying in Barbados. This, presumably said, this is my hotel, because how did they know what hotel? Is it that somebody was spying on Mr. Thomas throughout this period?
Mr. Hamel-Smith, let me
where he was?
Let me interject and ask you. This raises multiple red flags, but in the context of citizen security, a citizen of Trinidad with their security, precisely how would this reflect on one's personal rights and one's personal security?
Yeah. Well, certainly, that's why we have a court for. You have a judicial body. Yes, you have a police force who have certain powers, but they can only initiate those powers when receiving an order from the court. So you get an independent unit having oversight over the process, and therefore that produces a certain amount of protection for the individual, that a third party, independent third party, has supervised this matter and deemed it proper to allow for these events to take place. But none of that happens here. None of it. Nothing has been forthcoming as to how the superintendent of police gets the power, is able to leave Trinidad. We don't know if he left in a commercial aircraft or a private aircraft or the army aircraft. Certainly, I'm not aware that the police have any aircraft of their own. And was that done surreptitiously? Was he allowed to? Did they apply to the Minister of National Security for permission for him to leave? Therefore, this ordinary citizen, therefore, says, but this can happen to me too. A policeman in Trinidad and Tobago can initiate a process, not use the judiciary to intervene, who is the bulwark of the protection for democracy, and assert rights. When that sort of thing happens, it's a reminiscence of, having a mongoose gang just picking up people, through women fancy. If you have an axe to grind against somebody, can somebody just be taken off the streets and put into custody? And hence the reason, of course, for the habeas corpus application. It indicates that some judge supervised this issue,
yes,
and came to the conclusion that it was wrong to continue holding Mr. Thomas in custody.
Mm-hmm. Now, let me ask you furthermore. So we understand, the basics of the case thus far. We wouldn't know everything, and the state has already appealed on 24 grounds. But in this entire matter, it is very troubling and worrisome. The other aspect of it is that does the Prime Minister use his position or his designation as head of the National Security Council conveniently?
We don't know, but the general public, and I'm surprised that more information isn't forthcoming, but the general public is entitled to know how this chain of events happened. But nobody, neither the police nor the government, no official has come forward to explain how these chain of events occur. And that is bewildering. It's worrying. As an ordinary citizen, you begin to be concerned. And now you're not just concerned about bandits, but you're concerned about people within the police force, within the government. In the absence of any story, in the absence of any evidence, the general public are going to draw their conclusions about this. And it's amazing that this should go. I would think that in another jurisdiction, we will be holding a general election.
Simply because of this?
Of course. How can this happen? I mean, this goes to the fundamental rights of citizens to be entitled to the protection of the law. And you drag that away, you just remove it somehow and give no explanation, so that the public are going to draw their own conclusions unless you can give evidence that seems credible. And then, of course, in all of this, you have Mr. Hines stating that, criminals have friends in high places in the context of this very matter. And, what else is one to draw from that other than the fact that criminals are able to get our judiciary, our police force, our cabinet to do all sorts of things that are not lawful.
Mr. Hamel-Smith.
An amazing remark.
Mr. Hamel-Smith, arguably, we do not have any evidence to suggest that is the case. Those statements were unfounded. The Honorable Minister of National Security did not provide any proof or anything to actually concretize that statement. However, in that same sense, we don't have any evidence to suggest otherwise. So was he entirely wrong for suggesting such?
I think so the Attorney General comes forward, I think totally embarrassed, and tries to explain to the country that is not what he meant. Well, everybody, it's just English language. I mean, it can't be that Mr. Hines, like Humpty Dumpty, says that words have the meaning that I give to them and no other, and therefore that's not what I meant. People understand, they listen, and they draw their conclusions from what he said. Obviously, Mr. Hines must be given an opportunity to explain, and I understand that process has been initiated. He can explain to us the context in which this was said and what he meant. So far, we have the Attorney General, I think embarrassingly, trying to put the gloss over that he didn't mean it. Well, then he must come forward and explain what, in fact, he meant by this. And in the absence of that, I imagine that there will be repercussions.
Well, I think I was rather surprised that the Minister of National Security was the one who actually held the press conference to update the nation as to where we're at with the case and where the state's position is. Should it have been the Attorney General updating the nation?
Well, the police force falls under the Minister of National Security, so I presume that he took it upon himself to provide some sort of explanation, which just took us deeper into the deeper into the hole and embarrassed, I think, the government altogether, and led more than ever one to the conclusion that somebody within the government was involved in this chain of events. That's a conclusion people draw in the absence of explanation. And there have been multiple opportunities to explain these events, and nothing has been forthcoming. And in the vacuum of information you create, then people are going to surmise as to what makes, inferences as to what is going to happen. You have to conclude whether or not these inferences are legitimate. But that is the nature of things. In the absence of information, within that vacuum, people will draw their own conclusions. And you would think the government would come forward to let us have a narrative that explains all of this. And even if all you do is to say, well, the government has no explanation, perhaps they just don't know. They're totally in the dark about this. That's a possible scenario.
Well, Mr. Hamel-Smith, that's where we'll have to conclude it, simply because we're out of time this morning. But I want to thank you very much for being here with us and for stating your opinion and your thoughts on this particular matter. It indeed raises multiple red flags, and as you just mentioned, this vacuum of information does not do justice to where we're at as citizens in understanding what is taking place. But for now, thank you very much, sir, and I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Ketan. Glad to be here, and no doubt we'll meet again.
Certainly, sir. Take care. All the best.